Welcome, dear friends. This is a continuation of the series of the origin of the Beyonder versus Dr. Manhattan. If you missed out of the previous series, you can find the link on the comment section to have a full grasp of this mythic showdown. Do have a wonderful time as you enjoy the series in the boundless tapestry of creation, where power bends reality and gods walk between thoughts and thunder. There exists a realm unlike any other, a domain beyond Marvel, beyond DC, a universe sculpted by myth, conflict, and cosmic will. This is Mythic Universe, where legends are not told, they are forged. Across dimensions where time falters and space shatters under the weight of supreme beings, two forces now rise to define the very essence of existence. On one end, the Beyonder, born outside the multiverse, wielding limitless potential, a being who once made entire realities kneel without raising a hand. He is curiosity incarnate, bound by no law, shaped by no form. A god who questions meaning because he has never known consequence. On the other end, Eryxion, the divine architect of the Mythic Universe, a force of godlike awareness, balance, and might. A protector who doesn't just reshape reality, he understands it. He is not just omnipotent, he is the embodiment of purpose-wielding power. What happens when raw power meets divine reason? When chaos challenges order, not for dominance, but for justification? You are now entering the second saga of a titanic conflict. This isn't just a battle of fists and force. It's a war of philosophies, of meaning, of what it truly means to be supreme. Only here on Mythic Universe does the narrative dare to go beyond spectacle, to confront the very soul of omnipotence. Prepare yourself, Eryxion versus the Beyonder. This is not just a clash, it is the reckoning of all that exists. Clash of boundless will, Eryxion versus the Beyonder. Series, The Beyonder Saga, Book 2, Chapter 1, Reflections of Eternity. The echoes beyond all things. There are places beyond comprehension, where time folds into silence, where existence drifts unanchored, and thought gives birth to cosmos. Within such a place, a realm not shaped by gods, but which births them, the Beyonder stood, or rather existed, no longer the curious observer he once was, nor the volatile force that toyed with universes like a child snapping twigs. He had evolved, after the encounter with Dr. Manhattan, an anomaly that challenged his perception of structure and order. The Beyonder had turned inward, seeking not more power but meaning. He found none. He had scoured the multiverse, annihilated gods, absorbed cosmic abstracts, and reduced concept itself into digestible units of will. Yet nothing had filled the void, not power, not control, not omniscience. His confrontation with Manhattan had stirred a paradox, a being tethered to time, and yet liberated by awareness. Where Manhattan found peace in inevitability, the Beyonder found only revulsion. I am, he spoke into the void, and galaxies unfurled from his words. But even as he created, he found no resistance, no dialogue. He wanted not power, but a counterpoint. Someone who could not only withstand his fury, but challenge his truth. He heard whispers across existence, a name. Not a god, not a titan, but something else. Eryxion, the maker of the mythic web. Eryxion existed beyond time, not as a ruler, but as the will of balance itself. He had once been a force of justice, a protector, a challenger of chaos, but had become something vastly more. Upon reaching godhood, he had done what even the Beyonder had not. He created a multiverse with built-in equilibrium, designed not to serve him, but to evolve past him. He had faced beings like Aetheron, waged war against the primordial null, and walked the spaces between death and thought. His omnipotence was not rooted in brute creation, but in absolute understanding. He did not seek to dominate the unknown. He embodied it. Where Beyonder was the unchecked flood of desire, Eryxion was the sculptor of cosmic necessity. The philosophical divide, the Beyonder arrived as a tremor across infinite realms, his presence melting barriers, unraveling paradoxes, erasing entire timelines by proximity alone. And yet Eryxion stood untouched, not because he was stronger, but because he was unmoved. "You are the culmination of unbound will," Eryxion said, appearing not as a form, but as all forms, his voice resonating through reality like a law being passed. "But you lack purpose." The Beyonder's laughter fractured a universe. "Purpose is limitation. I am beyond purpose. I am." "Then you are Chaos Master's freedom," Eryxion responded. "You are a scream in a vacuum, echoing endlessly into nothing. And you think noise makes meaning? Spoken like a creature desperate for control," Beyonder shot back, manifesting a dozen versions of himself, simultaneously, each from a timeline he had personally rewritten. "Your order is a chain. Your balance is a coffin. You're afraid of what true freedom looks like." Eryxion let silence reign for a moment, then, "Freedom without self-awareness is destruction. You create, yes, but without consequence, without reflection, without understanding." "I understand everything," the Beyonder roared. "No," Eryxion said, stepping forward. "You know everything. That is not the same." The Council of All Realities. For a moment, the multiverse paused. Entities across creation felt it. The living tribunal shuddered. The presence turned his gaze. The one above all said nothing, for what was coming would surpass even divinity. And in the mythic universe, where Eryxion reigned as the silent guardian of causality, reality began to react. Not collapse, but prepare. The laws he had written did not bend, they adapted, for they recognized the coming threat not as a test, but as a necessity. Beyonder had rewritten the Marvel multiverse on a whim. Eryxion had created the mythic universe with deliberate restraint, a calculated, conscious act. Not because he could not dominate, but because he chose not to. He understood that power without control is merely erosion. Creation without intent is a flood, not a design. And divinity without responsibility is nihilism with flair. The two would meet, not as simple titans, but as philosophies made flesh. The reason for war. The Beyonder's challenge was not for conquest. It was not vengeance. It was not even curiosity. It was defiance of principle. "I will unmake your mythic universe," he declared. "Not because I must, but because I can. Because it dares to claim purpose where none is needed. Because your order offends my nature." "You are not my enemy," Eryxion replied. "You are the shadow my light demands." "But you cannot extinguish me," Beyonder spat. "No," Eryxion agreed. "I can only enlighten you by force if I must." And in that moment they understood the stakes. This was not a battle for territory or supremacy. It was the oldest war of all. Chaos versus purpose, desire versus will, freedom versus meaning. And in that war, Eryxion stood unshaken, not as a warrior, not even as a god, but as a cosmic verdict, forged in the fire of restraint, shaped by divine intent, and hardened by the weight of responsibility. The calm before the godstorm. Before the first blow could be struck, the battlefield unfolded. Not a planet, not a galaxy, not even a multiverse, but a blank slate born of their combined presence. A hyper-reality outside all known frames, a reality both could affect, but neither controlled. It was a place of pure will, where action was dictated by philosophy, and strength was determined not by size, but by justification. The Beyonder floated in infinite avatars, each smirking with absolute confidence. Eryxion stood alone, not because he needed no army, but because he was one. The void trembled, not because it was weak, but because two truths had arrived to test its silence. The Beyonder stood in a million forms, each a representation of a different aspect of himself: curiosity, wrath, pride, chaos, liberation. His avatars glowed with different hues, some radiating starlight, others draped in void energy darker than the concept of death. Each of them buzzed with limitless potential, unshaped and unfiltered. And at their center was the Prime Beyonder, the one who had unraveled and rewritten entire realities with the idle flick of a thought. Across from him, Eryxion stood as one, not because he couldn't create infinite versions of himself, but because he didn't need to. His form radiated stillness, yet his presence thundered through the lattice of all existence. His silhouette shimmered like a living spectrum, constantly transforming to reflect the nature of truth itself. Behind his eyes glowed the weight of 1,000 universes, realities he didn't just create, but understood, guarded, and elevated. The standoff lasted no measurable moment. Time within this plane no longer behaved. There were no beats of seconds, no arcs of cause and effect. There was only will. Beyonder acted first. He raised a single hand and crushed the realm. They stood in, imploding it into conceptual fragments. The ground beneath their feet vaporized into non-existent particles. Not broken, not destroyed, but unwritten. The space between them vanished as if it never existed. He didn't strike in a straight line. He collapsed the laws that allowed distance to be possible. Eryxion did not move. Instead, he reached into the abstract, nothing Beyonder had created, and rewrote it into structure. He allowed the void to return to form, but not as it once was. Now it possessed resistance, an integrity forged by his will alone. Beyonder's unmaking had birthed a canvas. Eryxion's will turned that canvas into order. They clashed, not with fists at first, but with ideas. The Beyonder summoned paradoxes, unsolvable equations, emotional implosions made manifest, existential, wonderings so vast that entire sentient civilizations could collapse just from witnessing them. He hurled quantum infinities wrapped in the skins of dead gods, released tides of raw omnipotence compressed into single atoms that distorted the logic of every structure they touched. Eryxion answered not with defense but with absorption. He did not shield himself. He allowed the waves to enter his being, analyzed them, disassembled their meaning, and integrated their functions. Every law the Beyonder broke, Eryxion rewrote. Every contradiction the Beyonder unleashed, Eryxion made sense of. Not to reverse them, but to transcend them. Where Beyonder embodied unfiltered potential, Eryxion wielded perfected understanding. The battlefield shifted into something stranger. Time returned, fractured, looping, unpredictable. They now fought in the ruins of concepts, broken timelines, shattered identities, dead universes shrieking as they were resurrected, only to collapse again. Eryxion was hurled through a loop where he was forced to relive the destruction of his Mythic Universe 10 million times in a second. Beyonder laughed as each iteration piled more trauma on him. Eryxion, however, used the loops. He observed each outcome. He measured the failure. He studied the consequences of untethered power and understood Beyonder's every philosophical blind spot. He exited the loop, not damaged, but armed with insight. Do you see now? Beyonder taunted, his many forms fusing into a colossal being. His presence now so wide, it threatened the pillars of the overvoid itself. There is no need for rules, no need for design. I create because I want to. I destroy because I can. I do not need purpose, I am the purpose. Eryxion rose calmly, the scars of 1,000,000 simulated collapses etched into his form like divine scripture. You mistake consequence for oppression. You are not free. You are trapped by your own impulses. And because you believe power is meaning, you are hollow. Beyonder sneered, unleashing a multiversal scream. Psychic wail so vast that abstract entities began to evaporate in distant dimensions. Gods who had never heard his voice now knelt in despair, not from command, but from the overwhelming presence of unreasoned supremacy. Eryxion answered with silence. That silence deepened, spreading like gravity. It wasn't emptiness. It was weight, responsibility, the burden of every life form he'd ever created. Every law he had balanced, every cosmic equation he had, woven into the mythic web. And from that silence emerged a single act. Eryxion raised his hand, and all across the abstract realm law returned. Time stabilized. Physics corrected. Chaos trembled. The field became something entirely new, a place where only beings with a right to power could sustain it. Beyonder stumbled, not because his might diminished, but because his philosophy had no roots. You are power, Eryxion said, but you are not meaningful power. You are instinct without reflection, a scream without intention. The Beyonder roared in defiance and reformed himself again, now infused with the very substance of the one above all's remnants, wielding a blade of pure nihilism, an anti-construct, so sharp it could sever concepts from cognition. He flew forward, slashing through principles, ethics, and cosmic constants. Eryxion closed his eyes and opened them behind Beyonder. He did not strike with a weapon. He spoke a word, just one, understand. The word wasn't sound. It was a mandate, a metaphysical force that pierced through Beyonder's psyche and force-fed him awareness. Not knowledge, not data, but true, penetrating understanding of every world he had destroyed, every sentient being he'd snuffed out, every consequence his unchecked desires had set in motion. Beyonder staggered. He saw his own legacy and was horrified. He saw himself not as a free being, but as a cosmic toddler given a loaded weapon. For the first time since his ascension, he felt the weight of guilt, not because he had been wrong, but because he had never considered right. And in that instant, he weakened, not in strength but in conviction. Eryxion moved, not to destroy, but to resolve. He became the embodiment of cosmic accountability. His form merged with the mythic web itself. He extended a hand toward Beyonder, not to smite him, but to invite comprehension. True freedom, he said, is not doing whatever you want. It is knowing why you shouldn't. Beyonder hesitated. He could unmake Eryxion now. He still possessed the raw power to do it, but he would no longer be right in doing so. And that knowledge undid him. The battle did not end with annihilation. It ended with submission, not of power, but of philosophy. Beyonder sank to one knee, not in worship, but in acknowledgement. You are what I could have been, he whispered. Had I chosen to listen? Eryxion nodded, not in victory, but in sorrow. You still can. And thus, the battle between omnipotent forces concluded not with an explosion, but with a truth. Unrestrained power without accountability is not freedom, it is entropy. True supremacy lies not in what one can do, but in the wisdom to know what one should not. Eryxion stood alone once more, not because he had destroyed his enemy, but because he had transcended the need to. And in that victory, he did not become greater. He became complete.